I see he's raising his desk to copy me.
I am.
Ora abbiamo Job che ci presenta delle slide che ha prodotto oggi. So you made the slides today on Twitch. This will be live on Twitch. This will be in English. And
yes.
We have guests from NL-NOG. So all of you, please. Job, tell us what considerations you've made for us. Thank you very much.
So is the audio working? Can you guys hear me?
You feel a bit far away.
Let's see if I can tune the input volume.
But otherwise, it's pretty okay. So I would just go ahead.
All right, let's just start. So hello, folks. Ciao a tutti. My name is Joop Snijders. I work for NTT, and I'm based in the Netherlands, but I guess none of that matters anymore since everything is remote. So I could be based on Antarctica, and you guys would not know the difference. And what I want to share with you guys today is some operational considerations I came up with in the last few days and hours related to the operation of IP networks during pandemics such as the Corona outbreak. In today's agenda, I want to talk about the concept of supply chains, the impact of on projects that require multiple people, how we treat our own staff, what we should expect from remote hands, some change management considerations, and then I conclude with what maybe are recommendations. I don't know if they're good ones or bad ones, because honestly, nobody has any experience with this whole situation. So all of us are scrambling to figure out how things work and what it is we should be doing. So what is it we know about Corona? And I'm not going to pretend I'm a biologist and know anything about medical aspects, but to me as an outsider, a few things currently seem of note. We have no vaccine, there's no medicine with guaranteed recovery, there's no quick tests to learn whether somebody has Corona or not. It appears physical distancing helps. This is what many governments are already recommending. In Italy, there's a lockdown, from what I understand. In the Netherlands, there's effectively a lockdown. You won't get a fine if you walk on the streets, but it is actually, it's very strongly recommended to avoid most people. And it appears that a 2-week quarantine period seems to be effective because the symptoms pop up within 2 weeks if you are infected usually. So this 2-week quarantine can maybe be considered a sort of test, but it's a very costly test because it takes 2 weeks away from our lives. And that makes it a very long and costly test. So I mean, it would be horrible to fly to IT-NOG and first sit in quarantine for 2 weeks, and then when you go back, sit in the Netherlands for 2 weeks isolated. That would make a single-day event into a 4-week adventure. So whatever Corona is, we can conclude that groups of people should be avoided. Now, in this day and age where everybody's working from home, I think internet stability is one of the most critical things we have right now. Just yesterday, somebody emailed to the NANOG mailing list and said, I recently had to reschedule an X-ray because the license manager for the X-ray machine was acting up. I don't think people have a grasp for how much of the medical infrastructure no longer works when the internet is down. And these are scary things. I mean, honestly, why does this X-ray scanner even have a license manager? But that is what it is. That is the reality we have to deal with. We really have to focus on making the internet usable for everybody. because we depend on it not just for our internet engineering work, but there's many users of the internet that don't know anything about the underlying infrastructure, but are very much relying on the underlying infrastructure. About supply chains. Right now, it may not yet seem apparent since our current situation is so new compared to the previous version of reality. But I've heard some rumors here and there that supply chains are actually in trouble. And this is not very hard to imagine why that would be, because if groups of people are no longer allowed to congregate, then having a factory where people congregate to build line cards or other components of routers is going to be very hard. And we have to realize that most of the line cards in our equipment, or the fabric cards or power supplies, an incredible amount of those components is assembled by hand. Human fingers are so good at high precision work, and the volume of this type of equipment is quite low, and the complexity of this type of equipment is really high. So you end up with using human assembly lines, and those assembly lines may no longer exist or may exist in reduced capacity. And we have to consider that line cards are usually not made in the same country where you will use the line cards. As far as I know, there's zero line card production in either the Netherlands or in Italy. A lot of these products come from China, which means that if you ship such products to the Netherlands or to Italy, it has to pass through multiple hubs, multiple borders. And at those borders, staff may be reduced. There may not be that many people working in the customs processing facilities, again, because groups cannot congregate. So even if the line card is made, and even if the line card is shipped, it still may not arrive in a timely manner in the place where we need it. And also in the supply chains, we have to consider that some of the equipment is quite heavy, so it cannot trivially be carried by a single person. If we think about, an MX 2020 chassis, that is something that would always be handled by multiple people, which again is challenging because our whole society is now understaffed. So supply chains are an issue, and I think we're going to suffer a lot from that. Other aspects, like for instance, if our company wants to refit a POP deployment, if we want to upgrade the POP to the latest and greatest equipment, what we very often end up doing is putting the new router sort of close to the old router, and then in a maintenance window repatch from the old equipment to the new equipment. And we, in NTT, because of the automation, we can move roughly 1 fiber per minute. So if you think about a big chassis with hundreds of fibers, that's 1 night of work. Multiple people are involved. But installing such equipment in a rack or a cage adjacent to the old thing usually requires multiple people that help carry the physical weight or do parts of the physical install. So going forward, I think we have to very much consider that whatever work we are asking a crew to do, it has to be work that fits well within the capabilities of a single person. We can no longer send crews to do work, we can send individuals to do work. And that really, to me, changes the game of how this internet thing is built. Another thing to take into consideration is that submarine cable work could end up being hampered. If there's anything to be learned from the Diamond Princess cruise ship that was moored off of Yokohama in Japan, is that ships potentially are a terrible place to be in when there is a biohazard such as Corona. So what this means is that the ships that are currently out there, the cable repair ships that we have right now, are probably not yet infected. But if crew needs to be swapped out, if they time out, if they spent a few months on the ship and it's time for them to go home and bring a new crew, that new crew may need to be on that ship for 2 weeks in quarantine. And being in quarantine on a ship is not trivial, has been proven by the Diamond Princess incident. And we also have to keep in mind that there's actually not that many cable repair ships. There's, I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact number, but these are very specialized ships, very specific, purpose-built to lay down cable or to drag up sea cables and splice things together. You cannot just send any ship to repair a cable. So, and some of you may know that cable repairs already can take multiple months because of a shortage of repair ships. Maybe a cable breaks in Asia and the qualified repair ship is still in Norway. And that means that even maybe they're still working on a project there. And once the project finishes, that ship needs to move to Asia. And ships don't go as fast as airplanes. In some cases, it can take a few weeks before ships even arrive at the right place. And then they have to start searching for where the cable problem is. So I think what we're going to see in the future is that when undersea cables break for whatever reason, that there can be very significant delays before such cables are repaired. And this will lead to congestion on alternative paths, unfortunately. Let's talk a bit about our own staff, our colleagues. So we know that physical or social distancing, or however you want to call it, is currently the best protection against corona. And this means that your own staff should not be in offices. I think the split team approach, where half the staff is in the office, half the staff works from home, is still not safe enough. People need to isolate. And if you split your teams in half and let those people congregate, they're not isolated, they are groups, and within such groups, corona can spread. Similarly, your staff will no longer be attending conferences or trade shows. All those physical gatherings are canceled. They no longer exist. There is no physical IETF meeting. I doubt there will be an ITNOC meeting. I fully expect the right meeting to be canceled. And this brings trouble because we expected to meet with people at such conferences to discuss peering upgrades, to do sales, to get debugging information or ask second opinions from coworkers at other places. Yeah, we have yet to fully understand what the full impact of this is. So another interesting thing that happened is that overnight, in a matter of just a few days, a lot of network operation centers moved to a work from home approach. And while initially this may be a bit challenging because people need to get VPNs up and running, maybe the NOC employees do not have a proper office at home because they were used to go to the office and do work there with the equipment provided by the organization. So it's a bit of a scramble. It's a bit of figuring out how do things work, how do we make people effective, how do we set up communication that normally happens face to face. But I can see one really big benefit. In a lot of NOC operations that were anchored out of a single city in a single office building, the pool of potential employees that may exist has to be people that actually want to live in that city and travel to that office. And if you have a NOC operation center in Dallas and a highly qualified candidate in San Francisco, in the pre-corona world, you'd need to try and convince that person to move from San Francisco to Dallas. Now, in the post-corona world, the playing field is now entirely level. You can hire anybody from anywhere And this, I think, opens up a lot of opportunity. This will fundamentally change how we look at hiring people, since suddenly the physical location is no longer relevant. And I actually think that for a lot of organizations, it will now be much easier to hire highly qualified people for their operations, because they no longer need to confine their search to a specific region, but they can actually search globally. But that's, I think, one of the very few upsides of Corona. It's just a tiny silver lining. Now, other things to take into consideration: airports, customs, that type of places needs to be avoided. For instance, Schiphol Airport is almost defunct. There's barely any flights going. But if there are flights going, again, you would congregate way too many people in the same airplane or in the same waiting area. And I think it would be irresponsible to expose your crews and your employees to such crowds. So in essence, you can no longer fly your crew around to do installs. And this kind of rolls into the concept of remote hands, because if the concept of avoiding gatherings applies to your own company, it probably also applies to companies that are supplying you with services such as rack space, power, and whatnot. And those data centers may never have anticipated that they would have to supply all the remote hands work. A lot of data centers have only a few remote hand staff, because the assumption is that most of their customers will bring or send their own engineers to do the work in the racks that those customers are renting. So a data center may not be equipped to handle a lot of remote hands requests. Maybe even worse, staff in those data centers is already sick and they're at home unable to do any work for you. I've seen quite a few data centers request that people only visit the data center if there's absolutely an urgent reason, and if it can be postponed for any reasons, please postpone it. Do not come to the data centers is a message that some of them have put out. So what we have to realize here and assume is that data center remote hand services in many places are at least degraded. And this means that there's less qualified people available to do your work, that if there are people available, that they maybe have a long list of things that they need to do. So that can result in very significant delays, where you'd normally pick up the phone and expect help within an hour. Maybe now that's going to take multiple days. This is something to keep in mind. And in discussing some of this at the NLNOC mailing list, Marco made a very insightful comment where he said, you know, maybe we need to postpone a lot of non-critical maintenances. If it's not broken, don't try and fix it. So unless you're adding capacity to support those working from home, you're probably doing everybody a big favor if you don't touch anything unless there's an outage or something you know for sure will cause an outage soon. Stability is key. Excellent, on-point summary of what is happening right now. This rolls into a graph I made a few years ago when I was trying to understand how route leaks behave in the global internet. And I had taken a number of years of route leak information from Jared Moss' BGP leak page, and mapped those incidents to the day of the week they were happening. And what we can learn from this graph is that on Sunday and Saturday, let's call that the global weekend, you know, taking into consideration all the time zones and small variances that exist. But there most definitely seems to be a pattern that there's less route leaks during the weekends when people are probably not doing work. So this means that a lot of internet incidents are actually human triggered incidents, and that if people are not touching things, those incidents don't happen. Now, if we look at network stability, what does network stability mean? And I think for network stability, there are a number of preventive measures that a network operator can take to try and prevent incidents. Many of you already know some of these tricks, and they've been covered extensively through Manners presentations, through RIPE and NLNOC and NANOC presentations. But in short, I believe some of the preventive measures that help increase network stability are, for instance, maximum prefix limits, which help guard against full table route leaks. Extensive AS path filtering also helps. Some of this is done under the marketing name PeerLock. By the way, I'm going to share the URL to this PDF so that everybody can click on the links later on if they're interested. So maximum prefix limits can help increase network stability. AS path filters can help increase network stability. Obviously, eBGP prefix filters help. You can generate those using the IRR or a source of IRR, whois, and RPKI data. And finally, of course, RPKI-based BGP origin validation most definitely helps increase network stability. Many countries have tons of subscribers in giant prefixes. Like in Japan, there's millions of customers that are part of single /9s or /10s. In Italy and Germany, there's also an extreme amount of access network subscribers congregated in very short prefixes. And what this means is that if anybody, for any reason, would announce an unauthorized, more specific of such a country's prefix, you can fairly easily end up in a situation where you pull offline half a country. I know for a lot of countries that there's only a handful of BGP routes that you would have to hijack, and it takes out large amounts of home workers. So I think in this day and age with Corona, RPKI is more important than ever to help maintain and improve network stability. And then for your systems, keep following security patches. If your systems become compromised, it can hamper your ability to allow people to work remotely or access the information they need. So we got to stay up to date on any and all security updates that apply to the software we use. And since everybody's working remotely, things like TLS and DNSSEC, I think, continue to have significant value in increasing stability of the overall architecture. But I will say it is going to be very hard to figure out what is critical work and what is not critical work. What can we postpone? What must we postpone? And what is it that we must absolutely not postpone? I am not a big believer of large change freezes. I don't think there's value to just issue a blanket. We are not changing anything anywhere anymore, because that won't work. We always need change to provision capacity or add new customers. So some change is needed, but which change? I don't know. Now, network stability can, in some cases, also be improved by reactive measures. And that means that you have systems in place that will help you understand that something currently is going wrong, or that something in the past had gone wrong, and that maybe you should invest time or research into how to prevent such an incident from happening again. So for instance, BGP Alerter, written by Massimo from NTT, serves as a replacement for BGP MON. BGP MON is now owned by Cisco. They announced that it's going to be end of life not too far from now. And that means we, in this day and age of having thousands of home workers, if prefixes get hijacked, either by accident or maliciously, it is of paramount importance that network operators at least are aware that such a hijack took place. So BGP Alerter can help you figure out if attacks are taking place or took place. Other things that are useful, for instance, PMAct can help you understand what paths are taking what kind of load, whether they're congesting, if what ASNs you have a lot of traffic to, which ASNs you may need to propose some private interconnection with. But alternatives that exist to PMAct are, for instance, Kentic, which is a thing that runs in the cloud, and Deepfield that can run either in the cloud or on-premise. But whichever you pick, I think now is a really important time to have a good grip on where is traffic entering my network, what is the type of traffic, what kind of traffic, where is it going, and do I have ample capacity in such things. Another thing you can do as a reactive measure is that you feed your view on the internet to one of the global BGP collector efforts. So for instance, do set up sessions towards route views and RIPRIS and the analog ring looking glass, because the more data you share about what you see of the default free zone, this will help others understand what happened in case there were outages. Maybe you somehow ended up accepting a hijack, or maybe you were the only target of a hijack and nobody else saw the hijack. In these cases, having your view stored for analysis in say, route views can be incredibly valuable to understand what happened after incidents. And what I would also recommend, if you don't want to feed your BGP view to route views or RIPE, at least record your view on the internet internally in your own network. So set up a BGP speaker that is an iBGP route reflection client of all your edge routers, and have that open source component store in MRT or BMP format what BGP updates pass through your network. This will help you understand outages better when they happen. And this is some of the bad news. I think we have to assume that this Corona thing is not going to blow over in a few weeks. I think it's going to impact our society multiple months. Some say 3 months, some say 6 months, some say more than a year. Time will tell, but at least at this point in time, there is no indication or solution in sight against Corona. And even if a vaccine is found, it may take 1 or 2 years before the vaccine is properly produced in large enough quantities to give it to 7 billion people on this planet. But what if that vaccine only works on half the world's population? What if there's some genetic complication that renders the vaccine less effective? This will take a long time to figure out. And what we've already observed is that with everybody working home, with sources of entertainment like bars and restaurants and cinemas and museums and concerts and festivals all being canceled, that people resort to the internet as their lifeline towards work, as their lifeline towards friends and family, but also as a source of entertainment to get through the day. And this has resulted in significant internet growth. I can confirm that from my employer, but it's also been observed at, for instance, Cloudflare or internet exchanges such as M6 and Lynx. So the internet suddenly grew volume-wise. And if we go back to that issue with the supply chains, we know that line cards will fill, and we know that in the really high-end routers, the manufacturing tolerances are very narrow, and I think the mean time between failure of a modern-day router compared to, say, a 6500 is actually shorter. And what we used to do is just, oh, a line card died, no problem. Send remote hands, swap out the line cards. We can be back up and running within, 2 or 3 hours. Now, with a shortage of, either with already a shortage today or a shortage that will come in the next few weeks, if your line card fails, it may not be replaced. There may not be people to replace it. There may not be components to replace it with. And this will result in congestion on the remaining paths if those don't have the capability to carry the workload. And what I mentioned with the cable repair ships, fibers will break. This happens. It can be mudslides. It can be other incidents. There can be digging incidents. And if cables break, it may take longer than usual before they are repaired. And until they are repaired, this again puts more load on whatever paths are still online, potentially resulting in more congestion. Another thing we need to take in mind, the security considerations of having everybody working from home through VPNs. But the big message here is a lot of companies cannot grow at this moment because they cannot add new equipment, they cannot add new capacity, they cannot add new blocks of customers. And what does that mean if we cannot grow? So, Max, my final slide. We're almost at the end of the presentation. My recommendations to you as fellow network operators would be, if you do changes, focus on improving the stability of the network. And whatever stability means in your situation, maybe it's adding more PNIs to the big CDNs, maybe it's deploying RPKI, maybe it's applying some security updates. Think that with every change you are considering to do, think how it impacts stability and if it increases or decreases stability. Consider upgrading your employees' home internet connections. I think bosses, if they were not paying for your internet connection, they should start paying for your internet connection, since your internet connection is now the office. Consider sending 4G SIM cards to your employees so they have a backup internet connection. Assume you cannot add capacity, so you have to repurpose remotely whatever it is you had installed in the data center, and sometimes be creative. But in repurposing things, always take into consideration, are you improving stability, or with repurposing capacity decrease stability? Other questions that come to mind: do artificial rate limits still make sense? If you have a peering link and it's rate limited to half the capacity of the physical interface, does that still make sense, or is it time to get rid of such rate limits? And work from home is the new norm, so consider expanding your pool of employees to beyond what you had before. I think it's going to be really tough to keep this internet thing running. There's going to be a lot of challenges. It's really going to require a lot of cooperation and collaboration between companies that used to compete with each other, but now should reevaluate whether you're competitors or just friends in the same boat that is slowly sinking, and perhaps should help each other out. I am optimistic that we can do incredible things. I have a lot of confidence in this community, but yeah, we have to adapt to the new situation. The new situation with Corona fundamentally alters a lot of how the internet is built and maintained, and we will need to figure out new ways and strategies to keep it running. And for that, we are going to need all of your help. This is the end of my presentation. I hope you found it enjoyable, and if you have any questions, you can always email me or call me or approach me on any of the chat platforms. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and send you guys the link.
We had a question on the chat. How is your organization preventing from having issues with enabling internal services for VPN users, or struggling to identify the source of network performance bottlenecks?
Within the organizations I'm affiliated with, I have not noticed any performance issues related to the VPN. But we have to keep in mind that in NTT, work from home and remote work for many years already was the norm. And this means that already a majority of employees was working from home, and that VPN or other remote access mechanisms have been tried and tested for years on end. If your organization was not prepared to have the entire workforce work remotely, I can imagine you may end up with performance issues on VPN concentrators. But if your organization was doing remote work anyway, most of the time, yeah, it's sort of business as usual.
Okay, that was really interesting, Job. Thank you very much for the presentation.